So we're here to talk about the connection between career development and mental health. And some of you may know, because this started 2 ACDCs ago, we've been working at this for a little bit in terms of Mike and I trying to collaborate on work he's been doing for years around career development and mental health, and work I've been doing more recently around the same topic. And what we'd like you to do, because Paula said, you know, you're the smart group, is we'll take you through a one-day workshop in the next hour. And we'll cover off essentially what we did for the Ignite Your Passion series that happened before Christmas. And for those of you who aren't members, CDAA runs a professional development series every year in October, November. And last year's was this one-day workshop on career development and mental health that Mike and I ran in 4 locations in Alberta. And we've since done it in 6 locations in Saskatchewan, a variation of it in Australia, and we're working on sort of spreading it out throughout Canada, hopefully, because we think it's kind of important that what we all do is we do our career development stuff, we call ourselves career development practitioners or employment counselors or however we label ourselves, and sometimes we forget why we're in business in the first place, which is really to help the whole person, right? We want to help people lead lives that feel good to them, that are productive, that contribute to society, that contribute to their well-being. And it's sometimes pretty easy to forget that. And so what we're trying to do is kind of bring that back to, okay, so what are the well-being or the mental health implications of doing the career development work we do? And what's the evidence out there for it? You know, because our field in some ways was, the assumption was that we were doing, you know, good mental health stuff, and without really testing it. And so what Mike and I have been doing is looking at what is the research around career development and mental health, what's the research around work and mental health, and as you'll see in a moment when I have a diagram for it, we'll also look at splitting out mental health and mental illness so that we can treat those two things distinctly. Because I doubt there's anybody in this room who would call themselves a career development practitioner would say, oh yeah, like I treat mental illness. That's kind of what I do. I cure mental illness. No, that's not what we do. And yet what we do is contribute a great deal to mental health. And we have, thank you, Mike. We do contribute a great deal to mental health. And we'll show you those distinctions in a moment. So I'm going to proceed and we'll just plow through. And we will get to the point of having some discussion. So I'm going to talk reasonably quickly, and if I end up talking too quickly, you know, raise your hand, or if you can't hear me, just let me know. You won't interrupt my train of thought. It's a one-car train, right? It's not a problem. So when you think about career development, and this ties into the question I asked this morning, when you bump into somebody who doesn't know you, like a neighbor, and they ask you what you do, what do you say? What's the label you use for yourself? Well, most people, when you say, oh, well, I'm a career development, like I introduce myself, I say, oh, I'm a career development guy. And people kind of look at me blankly and then say, oh, you help people find work, right? They equate this notion of career development and work. And what we need to do is separate that a little bit, because career development is kind of what we're doing, and part of it is to help people find work, but there's other things we do as well, right? We help develop people's capacity, we help people improve their decision-making, those sorts of things. So we're going to separate out career development and work for the purpose of this discussion, but the other thing we have to look at is this mental health, mental illness. And we know, and I'll go through how they're distinct in a moment, but we know they influence each other, just like we know career development and work influence each other. And we also know that work influences mental health. We know work influences mental illness, and vice versa, that these things are all interconnected, right? And it gets kind of messy when you look at all the relationships that we can look at. Now, we in career development don't have the kind of funds to produce a beautiful graphic like that one there that maps out, yes, you've got it, the interrelationship between all known dog breeds. Now, society has enough money to map out the interrelationship between all known dog breeds. This is, by the way, the National Institutes of Health in America who produced this. But we actually don't really have even a good idea about how we contribute to career development or how career development contributes to mental health or mental illness and those sorts of things. So we've got work to do, and that's kind of what we've been working on, and a bit of a research project. Now, when you go to pretty much any definition of mental illness and mental health that, say, a country would define, or the World Health Organization, or any huge public body, you see distinctions like the one up on the screen, which is from the Public Health Agency of Canada. Typically, mental illness is defined as some sort of impaired functioning, and it's associated with pain, right? It's associated with distress. And most definitions then also say, well, mental health is more than the absence of mental illness. And then they give you some sort of description around, contributing and feeling purposeful and having meaning and having relationships and that sort of thing. But very few of these go past this notion that mental illness is here, mental health is here, and I guess the absence of mental illness is sort of here. And that's kind of the assumption, right? And even our own Canadian Mental Health Association, that's sort of the model they use. And it's not helpful for us. This is helpful for us. This model here, which was developed by Corey Keyes back in the mid-90s, and Corey Keyes is one of those original second-generation positive psychologists along with Martin Seligman and people like that. What Keyes said is, well, what happens if we were to look at mental health as a separate continuum than mental illness? So you can have high mental illness, right, on one side, and low mental illness on another side, and you can have high mental health or low mental health, and they can happen simultaneously. Now, this starts getting pretty interesting, right? Because all of you know, and all of you have had a client, but all of you know somebody in your life who is affected by a mental illness, like a diagnosed, labeled mental illness, who, because of their high mental health, actually manages that illness quite well, right? So you know people with depression, you know people with anxiety, you know people with schizoid affect disorder, for example, who have a mental illness. It's not about denying that part, but because of their mental health, they can live a pretty productive life, a good life, and manage the effects of that illness. Not cure it, but manage the effects of that illness. So when you think about the work we do, this is sort of helpful, right? Because as career people, we can't say, well, we cure mental illness. But what I think we're going to show you is that we do contribute a great deal to mental health, which then helps people flourish. That top right-hand corner helps people flourish whether they have a mental illness or not. And what's interesting, too, about Keyes' distinction is, notice at the bottom right, there's that thing called languishing. And you think about many, many clients, say, between the ages of 24 and 32, who might have, been gung-ho, went and got a university education or a certificate or something, and then didn't get employment immediately, got discouraged, and now they're in their parents' basement playing video games on a couch. And it's not that they have a mental illness, but they are clearly not flourishing, right? They are languishing. So nobody would label them, say, as having a mental illness, but they're not being all they can be, to quote Abraham Maslow. And so we have a big role to play there, because we all know, and you've all had clients where you've taken this person who's kind of a little despondent, a little down and out, kind of lethargic, a bit apathetic, and you've seen them turn around once they figured out some sort of purpose that was achievable and had some steps towards meaning, right, where they could contribute. And all of a sudden you have a different person, and they were never mentally ill. They were just not mentally healthy. And this is the realm I think we can play in. So I'm not going to go on about that much. Just another distinction. So in the standards and guidelines this morning, you read the new variation of the definition of what career development is, or career development practitioners. Well, in the original standards and guidelines, you'll see, career development is about helping people manage their life, work, learning decisions in order to move to the life they want to live. And again, the layperson here is work. We help people find work. But the key word in there is manage, right? If we're really doing our jobs well, we help people manage their decisions and their plans and that sort of thing. And that management is much more than just what's the next job you're going to have or what's the next work you're going to have, right? And so this is where it's important to just split out work from career development. Because we know work has all sorts of effects on mental health. We also know work can have effects on mental illness and mental health. And it really depends on what kind of work. But for the most part, given the choice, and you didn't know about the nature of the work, for the most part, humans do well working from a mental health point of view. And obviously there are exceptions. There are some pretty horrible workplaces that actually destroy mental health and then start creating mental illness. But for the most part, humans do very well working. And in fact, there's tons of research on that. So, and that's not what we want to focus on, particularly for this talk. What we want to focus on is the career development stuff that helps somebody get work, yes, but it also helps somebody get into training and education, and it also helps somebody start making better decisions about other life things. And that career development process also helps somebody see themselves a little differently and articulate who they are differently, right? And just take the modest, humble resume as an example. You can do a resume as if it's just a document, or you can do a resume where your client is now seeing themselves in their own language and seeing themselves differently, right? Like if you really work it well, a good resume process can be a little bit kind of revelatory, right? People go, yeah, I've never thought of myself that way. But it totally makes sense, right? Or this is cool. Now we're actually helping people see themselves differently. So that's where I want to get to. In this diagram here, what we're looking at are what are the major sets of effects that are produced that are related to mental health outcomes when career development processes happen. And for the most part, I'll default to career development processes that we have something to do with because it's a career development conference. But you know and I know lots of career development stuff happens without any practitioner. Most of Roberta's career path, for example, involved no career practitioner, right? It involves some supervisor doing something or somebody passing a baton or somebody, right? But that all was career development stuff. And then, of course, what Roberta did with it was also career development stuff, right? So, but we'll pretend you're in the middle of this circle, right? That you're the important one. It's all about you. And let's take a look at what happens. So I'm just going to go through these effects one by one. When we do career development well, what we know is that hopefully, if all goes well, people get work. And there is a huge amount of research, as I said, that shows in the absence of other information, work is almost always better for mental health than not working. Okay? But the other thing we know is when people get work, they get an income. And income does not create mental health, but income to a certain level mitigates against languishing and mental illness. So being desperately poor is not helpful for anybody. Okay? So an income is a happy thing, and of course it removes anxiety, which tends to be anxiety and depression, right, are the two biggest diagnoses in North America at the moment. So having an income reduces anxiety. And then it's certainly in North American culture, social identity, right? That we define ourselves a great deal by what our occupational title is and what our status is, and that we are even working. And so these are things that we know. Each of these three things contributes to mental health. Each of these three things are pretty directly related to our work, right? That when we help people get work, that means they're getting an income, and that means they're getting some sort of title, right? So that's kind of a pretty straight line argument. Now, let's go to the less obvious, and they're going to get less and less obvious as we go around this circle. Is that music? Oh, man, why don't we get music? Where's your guitar, Mike? You got to have one in the car. Oh, herky. All right.
Why isn't he in this session?
Exactly. So if we're really doing our jobs well, and I mean really doing our jobs well, our clients leave more skilled than when they met with us. We're not making decisions for them. We're not writing resumes for them. We're not phoning employers for them. We're not going to interviews for them. We're not doing the self-assessment inventories for them, right? They're doing all that. And we're the facilitators of a process that help them develop abilities to see themselves differently, to make decisions differently, to consider different variables that they're making decisions about, to see what's around them more clearly and differently, right? Like the labor market, like educational opportunities, like the effect of peers on their behavior. Like we're helping them with all these skills, right? That we work on either explicitly or implicitly, depending on where you're working. And these skills, we'll call them career management skills. In Canada we had the Blueprint for Life Work Designs, but now we have, CAMET. Eastern Canada is working on actual career development competencies, and then we have the generic competencies or global competencies that Roberta alluded to this morning. So we've got career management competencies, we're working on those, we're working on global competencies, and then we're working on self-management competencies in a lot of cases, right? Anger management, time management, dependability, communication skills, those sorts of things. All of these things help people manage their environments better, help people manage their lives better, and have a link to flourishing, to mental health, to being able to be on that top right part of the graph. Again, none of these treat mental illness or do anything about mental illness, except create protective factors where the mental illness can be better managed and it's less likely to be triggered in the first place. But then if we go a little further, one of the things we know, certainly intuitively, and the research is kind of following behind that, is that as people improve their abilities, and as we continue doing our career development stuff, they start seeing themselves differently, right? When you're competent, you do things differently, you get different feedback from the world, and you start feeling kind of better about yourself, right? And so if we're doing our work well and we're helping people develop competencies, and we're actually also explicitly helping them look at themselves, then we start having a set of effects around self-perception, right? How they see themselves and how they see themselves as agents in the world, not just pawns, right? Not just, corks on the ocean bobbing around, but that they actually have efficacy. If there's a problem in front of them, they go, well, I can fix that, right? Or I can do something about that. That's part of what we do. And we develop with that a different kind of identity, not the social identity that comes with a job title, but this kind of more inner identity of who am I, what's important to me, what are my values, what are my interests, etc. We know that when we do our job well, people's perceptions of hope go up, that their sense that they can cope with an uncertain future, that increases. And that they actually, work volition, their actual desire to work goes up. Okay, so we've got those sets of effects, and all those effects have linkages to mental health outcomes. All right. Then, as people start seeing themselves differently, and they have different abilities, they start seeing the world differently, right? And they start seeing what's possible differently, but they actually see a range of opportunities differently. And so we're calling these opportunity perception effects, is when we do our jobs well with clients, our clients get more comfortable with the fact that the world's uncertain, that the world's changing, that it's, say, a gig economy that they're dealing with, that they can't predict the future. They become more comfortable with that ambiguity and uncertainty. We also know, as we help them focus in on what they want and where they're going and who they are and their strengths, that frees up, for lack of a better word, cognitive bandwidth. They have more mental capacity to look outward rather than worrying about looking inward. You know, and there's a number of kind of theories around this, but the basic premise is the more anxious you are about uncertainty, the more you look just at your immediate environment, right, and try and take care of yourself in a very immediate environment. And as you get more and more comfortable with yourself and with uncertainty generally, you can look more and more broadly and see more things, right? You can just see more things. This is hugely important in a world where our clients have to see opportunities for themselves. We also know on the opportunity perception side that as we help clients think about a preferred future for themselves, about goals for themselves, about a better life, what we're doing is helping them set up some intentions, right? Intentions for, here's the kind of life I want to live. Here's the better future that I see for myself. And a psychologist colleague of mine, Wayne Boss, down in Calgary, has this great little phrase: intention creates attention. So, you know, for example, you go to buy a car and you've done all this research on a particular kind of car, and then you go buy that car and you think, oh man, I'm the only person in the world who has this particular car, and then you drive off the lot and 50 of them pass you, right? That's that principle at work. Or lots of women in this room, the first time you got pregnant, immediately all you saw were baby carriages, other pregnant women, babies, etc. Like they just, all of a sudden, the world was populated. Whereas the day before, you might not have noticed, right? Well, this is what we do with our clients. Because we help them create intention, all of a sudden they can't help but see opportunity, right? They read the newspaper and they see opportunity. They watch the news, they talk to people and they see opportunity. All of these things then, again, contribute to mental health. Now, as I go around this circle, though, the contributions to mental health are getting a little hazier and hazier, and the research around it is getting hazier, and that's one of the things we're looking at. Okay, last thing. When you see the world differently, and you see yourself differently, the world starts seeing you differently. And opportunities available to you change because of how you see yourself and how you see the world. And this is super interesting. So you start feeling, as a person, I'm confident, there's lots of opportunities out there, I'm eager to go grab them. And now people who are looking are way more likely to tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, say at work, there's a course going on here, do you want to sign up? Or there's a conference up in Edmonton, do you want to go take that? Whereas if you weren't seeing yourself that way and you weren't seeing the world that way, say your supervisor might have just passed you by and gone, well, they're not interested, right? They're not curious. And so as opportunity perception changes, the actual effects of having opportunity change. You're treated differently in work, and because you're seen differently in work, your learning effects change, and of course relationships change, right? Because you get exposed to different people, because now you're out there looking, right? You're not inwards thinking about, oh, am I good enough for this, or I'm really nervous, or etc. Right? It's this confidence building thing. Do I have time, Mike, to tell my little story? Okay.
Oh, be careful about that.
Yeah, big mistake, Mike. You might as well go home now. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. I'll be short. story I want to tell is about animals, and I like telling it because this isn't just a simple thing about, humans influencing other humans' behavior. I picked up my daughter once when she was 13, and when your daughter's 13, the last thing she wants is to be in public with you. And I was picking her up and a friend, and even though she didn't want to be seen in public, she needed a chauffeur, right? So I pick her up at a store. It's a Saturday. Her and her friend jump in the back because, of course, they don't want to talk to me. And I have the radio on knowing they don't want to talk to me, so I won't be interrupted. And I'm listening to CBC, and the Quirks and Quarks show is on. And Bob McDonald's interviewing this woman who had gone to some South American rainforest, had captured 40 male birds, and then split them into two groups, banded them all, released 20 of them, just back in the wild, and then took the other 20 and, no kidding, took magic markers, the markers you use on a whiteboard or a flip chart, and made them more male. So she took their green feathers and she made them greener, and their blue feathers and she made them bluer, and their red feathers and made them redder, right? Because that's what, in this, most birds, the male's color is what defines their maleness or indicates their maleness. But she also, before she released both, she'd taken their testosterone levels, cortisol levels, and body mass, muscle mass, right? So she releases them all, and then 2 weeks later, not very long, she captures the same 40. And now I'm wanting to pull the car over because I think this is sorcery now. This is witchcraft. How did you find the same 40? I mean, there's 1 million birds in the rainforest, right? And you got the same 40? Like, how does that happen? Anyway, she did it. And guess what? She measures them. And the control group hadn't changed a bit. The ones she had colored, and they don't know they've been colored, right? The ones she colored had more testosterone, greater body mass ratio, and whatever's appropriate in cortisol, I think lower cortisol levels, in a very short period of time. And it had nothing to do with how they were thinking about it or how they were changing their behavior to communicate. The world just saw them differently. And I'm thinking, in the meantime, we'd already dropped off my daughter's friend, and she stayed in the back, and I was thinking, boy, she should be listening to this. And then I think, no point, she's 13, what's going to happen? Anyway, this interview ends, and from the back seat, she pulls out her little earplugs, and she goes, "See, Dad, you should get me those diesel jeans. I'd be way more of a woman, wouldn't I?" Anyway, the point is, we help our clients develop skills that help them see themselves differently, that help them see the world differently, and then the world sees them differently. And all of these things create a cycle of mental health outcomes that are not well researched. And that's kind of what we're working on right now. Mike, I think you're it. I think I'm going to just put it to you. So, by the way, we can stick around at coffee for questions. We got quite a bit to cover. So I won't take questions now. I'm going to turn it over to Mike. Just stew on that for a bit, and we'll talk more.
Sure. And actually, I'm going to go past a couple overheads here, and I'm going to talk about stress in relation to career demands. But I want to anchor to the thread that Dave's created around all the things that we do as career practitioners that make a difference. And so what Dave's organized there is all the outcome effects related to career development. And so I'm going to now talk about stress in relation to those. And I just need to sit my cup down. So Dave and I were we've worked together for a number of years. And around the last couple of years, we've converged and we brought this model together, stuff that I was doing. For me, I had a kind of a more selfish interest. I work in a post-secondary center, a post-secondary counseling center, and one of the things that we've dealt with over the years has been budget cuts and concerns about how do we allocate our money to provide the best services to students. And one of the questions that was raised was, ought we to just sit career intervention aside so that we can focus on mental health concerns? There's a mental health, and how many of you work in post-secondaries? And just us two. we'll talk. Okay, I got to throw my talk out now. No, I don't. But the question was raised: ought we to just sit career intervention aside so that we can just focus on these mental health concerns that are so important? And intuitively, and you feel it too, I'm sure. Intuitively, it seems like that's got to be a crazy idea because just from the work that we do, we know that we're doing things that intervene with our clients' mental health. That there's something we do in career intervention that relates to mental health, and so started trying to find a way to argue that what we do makes a difference to our clients' mental health. And so stress was a way into that, right? And just as an aside, when I was talking to Dave about it, and this is 5 years ago, I thought we could just find evidence. I thought we could go grab a paper that said, career intervention is mental health intervention. And Dave said that, and I'll quote you here, and Dave said, it's got to be like shooting fish in a bucket. It's too easy. We'll just go get the information, and then we can. But it turns out the information doesn't exist the way we want it to anyway. There's not a clear line between what we do and mental health outcomes. But talking about stress allows us to think about it. So I want to talk about stress. And so you know about stress. I won't get into to all the details of it, but just to say that stress is this reaction we have when we're worried about coping. And if we think we're going to cope, then we don't feel stressed. And if we're worried about coping, to some extent, we do feel stressed. And there's all these outcomes related to that. So I'll show you, this model is adapted from Brian Hebert's work, and I'm going to translate this model of stress to career decision making, and to talk about what we do as career practitioners, thinking of all the things we do, all the career processes, and the way that we intervene with stress. So here's a model. Am I experiencing career-related stress? No. Yes, if yes. I have some options, right? And so the first option is to reduce demands. If I'm concerned about coping, then we might ask, is there anything I can do just to get rid of the demands that I'm facing, right? So I work in post-secondary, or part of what I do is in post-secondary. So for students, one example would be if they're worried about a course, one thing they could do is they could just drop the course. And as soon as they decide that, irrespective of the future outcome, but as soon as they make a decision to reduce demands, they feel less stressed because their perception about coping changes. If you can't reduce demands, or you don't want to, sometimes you don't want to reduce demands, then the next option is to look at coping skills and to ask the question, so I can't get rid of the demand, or I don't want to, is there anything I can do that will help me to cope better with the demand? And usually that's around learning skills to do that. And if you can't reduce demands and you can't increase your coping skills, then we talk about just managing the stress. And that's usually when you think about stress management, we think about those kind of things. So I could get more sleep, I could exercise, I could do yoga, I could do all these things just to feel less worked up about the demands I'm facing. So here's an example. These are things you can frame as career-related demands, right? From choosing work, choosing a major, finding work, finding better work. Financial concerns can be career concerns, academic demands, identity concerns, and even relationship decisions. Thinking about the consequences of your career concerns in relation to your important relationships. All of those can be career-related demands. Okay. And then if we think about this from a stress perspective, then we realize there's all these mental health concerns or mental illnesses that are related to coping with stress. And so we could argue that these mental illnesses or mental illness concerns, mental health concerns, are related to how effectively we manage our career concerns. Okay. So career-related stress is amplified if the demand is great, if we're worried about coping, or if there's a serious consequence for not coping. And so all the things we do with clients relate to each of those. Okay, so let me walk you through the model. Am I experiencing career-related stress? No, yes. I can reduce demands, I can increase coping, I can manage my stress. And if I reduce demands, or here's examples of reducing demands, I can drop a course. In the context of just think the raw career work that we do, we can delay career decision-making. Or we can normalize, we do this with students, we can normalize indecision. And we can tell them, actually instead of having a terrible problem, instead of there being something wrong with you, you're actually part of the majority, right? And as soon as students know that, they feel less stressed. It actually eliminates the demand. There's all this pressure on me to make a decision, to deal with this. Actually, I'm normal. Nothing wrong with me, and that reduces demands. And then, whoops, how do I get back, Dave? Okay. And then most of what we do as career practitioners focuses on the coping side of the equation, right? So and these are all the things we do, from helping clients to organize information about themselves, helping them to build skills to navigate work search or labor market demands, helping them to go about job search, to do career planning, all these things, all the things we do as career practitioners really relate to helping clients to cope with the demands of let's say career, the demands of career decision-making, but it's more than just career decision-making. It's all the things we do to help clients cope with career-related demands. So we can reduce demands, we can increase our clients' capacity to cope with the demands they're facing, and if we can't do either of those, then their options for managing stress or career-related stress is to be a better animal to cope with the stress that they're facing. If we reduce demands, we do get stress reduction. And what I said earlier is the idea of perception changing as soon as a decision's made is actually really important. As soon as you make a decision to eliminate the demand, you feel less stressed. As soon as you decide you don't have to deal with the demand, you get stress reduction. If you start to manage your stress, if you start to get better sleep, and you eat better, and you learn how to relax, and you take a yoga course, over time, not immediately, you do get stress reduction. Okay, so those two are important. If you reduce demands, you get stress reduction. If you manage stress, you get stress reduction. And then what's really important about the work that we do is if you focus on helping clients to increase their capacity to manage the demands, you do get stress reduction, but you get all these other outcomes. And this actually relates. We should probably relate this to your model in a more direct way. But all of the things we do as practitioners help our clients to cope with demands they're facing, to feel less stressed. But there's all these other outcomes that are important. So stress reduction, skill development, long-term coping. That we plant seeds for reduced stress over the long term. Retention and engagement, that's a post-secondary context. Achievement, academic achievement, but maybe achievement in other areas of their lives. And then there's these identity changes in how people see themselves, the identity effects. So what we're doing, it does relate to stress reduction, but it does so much more as well. There's all these effects that come out of helping clients to cope better with the demands they're facing. Things we do to increase coping skills. I guess that's that broad list again, but we help clients with career decision-making skills, with organizing information about themselves, finding out about the world of work, researching occupations. We teach them that I think of the developmental perspective that actually what you're doing now, so do this with university students, but it applies to all the clients that we work with. What we're doing now is actually a coping resource that you're going to use in the future to cope with the demands that you're facing. Okay? So there's the model. Am I experiencing career-related stress? We have three options: reduce demands, increase coping, manage stress. What we do as career practitioners really helps our clients to cope with the demands that they're facing. So outcomes. Obviously, stress reduction. Oh, it is here. Primary prevention for anxiety and depression. So we've been, I think we've been reluctant to be bold about this, but one of the things that when we start talking about stress as being mental health intervention, our work as career practitioners reducing stress, one of the things we get to say is that we're doing things to increase clients' mental health. One of the other things we can say is that if we do our job properly, probably the stress we're reducing averts potential cases of anxiety and depression and other problems as well. We reduce work-related stress by by helping clients to fit better with their work situation. We bolster identity and self-understanding, increase self-esteem, self-concept, optimism, hope. We help them to learn skills, and then there's the achievement outcomes as well. In my role at the college, I do a career workshop, and it's focused on really it's an engagement workshop, but we go through all these different areas and really teach skills around organizing information about themselves, and also learning how to research, learning how to research career possibilities. And this is a list of the different areas we cover. And this is a post-pre-analysis, and you see the first column there says before, second column says after, and then there's a different score. And with a post-pre, what we're asking them is, compared to where you are now, and where you were compared to where you came in and where you are now, how do you feel about your gains in these different areas? And now all of these, except for 8 and 9, relate to content that's addressed in the workshop. And then if you can see, 8 is highlighted there. Let's go with this. The second highest score of all the different scores is for number 8, which reads, hope and optimism about finding work I enjoy after graduation. And then number 9, also, hope and optimism about finding meaningful work in areas I hadn't been considering. But the second highest score is this one, hope and optimism about finding work I enjoy after graduation. And what's striking about that is in the workshop, we never actually talk about hope. We don't do anything to talk about hope. We talk about coping, and we talk about dealing with career-related demands. Okay. So let me, just to see where, okay. Just to tie things together, we're doing mental health intervention because we're helping clients to deal with the stress associated with career-related demands. Stress is greater if coping is critical, if the demands feel huge, if coping is ambiguous, if we're worried about coping with the demands. Okay, so having said all that, let's do some work at the tables, and we'll ask the questions, and then we'll come back and debrief. The bold statement we're making is probably as career practitioners, what we're doing is career intervention. And I want to ask this question. In your role as career practitioner, in a conversation at your table, what has been your experience supporting mental health? And then this question as well, what implications does this have for your future work as a career practitioner? Okay? So I'll give you a few minutes, and then we'll come back into the room, and we'll debrief. Okay? They hiccup at the start. touch base with her, Dave.
I sit in on Jose.
Okay, Dave. I'm going to invite you back into the room. And I'm going to stay at the podium here, but if you'd be okay with reporting back a few of the examples. So the first question, in your role as group practitioner, what has been your experience working with mental health? And aware that I had a chance to listen at one of the tables, aware that you're not going to call yourselves mental health practitioners, but that we can say that what we do has mental health outcomes. Does someone want to share a bit of the discussion at your table? What has been your experience working with mental health, supporting mental health? Yeah.
One of the things that came up at our table was, given the context that we work in, trauma comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And, we're not trauma counselors.
Yeah.
But trauma is fully there in their lives.
Yeah.
We can't do our work without considering that.
Without considering the impact of trauma on how it's going to interfere with, or how it might be something that needs to be addressed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Addressed potentially before or
Yeah.
parallel with, or even in how trauma informs their understanding of their situation.
Yeah.
And their ability to engage with employment-related interventions.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that'd be an example of mental health concern coexisting with a career demand and maybe needing to be addressed at first. Thank you, Jose. Someone else? Wait. Yeah. Yeah.
But within our discussion here, we realized that even talking about it, acknowledging, validating, helps the client to help themselves and become a lot healthier.
Yeah, yeah. There's always. I think it's one of the themes that came up again and again when we're doing the workshops Dave mentioned. Is there's a shortage of resources to refer our clients to for mental health support, but what we're doing makes a difference in terms of helping our clients to cope better with mental health concerns. Yeah.
Mike, it's worth mentioning that idea of social support reduces stress, which is what those folks are doing.
Yeah, Dave just noted one of the outcomes of our supportive intervention, the social support of what we do actually is a buffer to stress as well. Yeah.
I think for most of these practitioners, sometimes when clients are coming to our agencies or facilities, the help that they're getting in many different ways. For example, not just in one-on-one counseling, but also events that they're attending, workshops that they're attending. That I think really does help support their
Yeah.
living on when they're attending these. And sometimes in my experience, what I see are individuals that when they leave, they may or may not sometimes leave with the job, but they definitely have a lot of other, skills or in some cases self-esteem and confidence when they leave as well.
Yeah.
And that I find in youth as well as people of all ages and all periods.
Yeah. So you're saying there's all these positive mental health outcomes associated with the things they're learning, working with us. Even if they don't get a job, there's all these mental health outcomes that happen. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Let's just take a minute just on the second question. What implications does this have for your future work as a career practitioner? Yeah. Okay.
We have to be mindful of the impact, both positive and negative, we can have on deliberate in our courses and helping practice.
Yeah. Okay. Being mindful. Comment is we need to be mindful of the and negatively of our work. Yeah. This was one of the end. Actually, we thought maybe you wouldn't get to that question. I'm just going to go back to. I've blown it, Dave. Yeah, completely blown it.
All over now, Mike.
There we go. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do it, Dave. I did completely blow it. I was going to say when we were doing the training, we talked about the kind of things practitioners need. There it is. That's the overhead there. But what is our role in mental health? And one of the things we thought about is we're not trying to intervene directly with mental illness. Our role is probably more educational, and that we're not actually responsible for assessing or gathering information about mental health concerns, even if they come up. But we do need some understanding of mental health concerns and some information about resources as well. I think so. I'll go with where we're thinking about the question. Is that the profession is changing, and there's going to be broader recognition that what we do does have mental health outcomes associated with it. And as we gather more information about it, and as we research it, at some point we're going to be able to say that there's mental health outcomes. We'll be able to say boldly that there's mental health outcomes associated with our work as career practitioners. And then there's going to be consequences for how we navigate that with our clients, and that we'll need to have a way of languaging that, and of working within our boundaries of competence as well. Sorry, Dave. I really did mess it up, didn't I? There we go. Okay. There we go. So now I'm back to where we left off. I'm going to turn things over to Dave. Dave, to tell us what you've been doing.
All right, and just one more thought on that last comment about paying attention to possible damage. And I think one of the things that, we were talking about standards and guidelines earlier, and you end up with these ethical issues around what's in our scope of practice and what isn't. And I think to some degree, we've gotten too good at that, and now we have practitioners across the country who are a little bit terrified of talking about mental illness issues in their session because they think they'll be overstepping their boundaries. And yet, how do you have a discussion about somebody's progress without asking some questions about mental illness and mental health and what the effect is? And it doesn't mean you have to be an expert. It means you just bring it up. And like you said, Roberta, just talking about it can be helpful, and treating it as normal can be helpful. But ignoring it, or trying to skirt around it because you're terrified of it yourself, that can actually be damaging, right? Because now you've got somebody suppressing something that's actually really important to who they are. And so it's complicated. And yet we know intuitively, and we've done lots of surveys with practitioners, that we all think we're doing something that helps bolster our clients' mental health. And yet the evidence around it is pretty tragic. And and this email is going to become important in a minute. So what Mike and I are working on is actually a sort of an agenda around this. And part of that agenda is we are writing a book on career development and mental health connections, and it will deal a little bit with mental illness, but mostly it'll be about how do you bolster your clients' mental health and work on those protective factors and the coping factors that really build on strength and promote that strength. So we're working on that, and it'll be a kind of a practitioner's handbook. We've been doing these workshops I mentioned earlier, and we plan on doing more, that really looks at how do you work within your boundaries of competence and bring these discussions into your career development practice more explicitly. And then we're doing research and we have help from Simon Fraser University, and the idea is we're doing research. We want to publish a series of papers, and we've done one in a series, which was on work and mental health and all the evidence there, and that was in the British Journal of Guidance and Counseling last year. But we do want to write a paper on career development and mental health, and then various components of that as well, and just dig up the research, right, and figure out what's out there. But then, and this is where the email will become important, we would love to create a community of practice of folks like you who are interested in this topic, who want to keep abreast of, what's going on and what's interesting, but eventually may also want to contribute to it. Now, we're super slow on this, because we've been threatening to do this for a while, but we are collecting names and email addresses, and if you're interested in being part of a community of practice, which initially will just mean that, we'll send you a little newsletter, blog sort of thing once every week or so, and probably won't start till the fall. And you can unsubscribe anytime. If you're interested in that, just email that address, liferole@tellusplanet.net, and just say, love to be part of the community of practice, and we'll get you into a database. But ultimately, that will be, we'll have a website around that with an ongoing blog where hopefully you folks become contributors at some point. And you say, hey, I'd like to write a blog, can I do so? What are the parameters? And that's where we'd like to post some of the research we're finding, figure out what are the best practices around this, how to do it effectively, how to do it efficiently. And lastly, back to Mike's point, which is super important, when we're faced with, we have mental health problems in our institution, in our community, in our client group, so let's just cut career development so we can put more money into yoga or whatever it is, like our mental health intervention. We do need evidence to say, no, actually, you're just creating the need for more yoga if you kill career development, more meditation, And it's not that yoga, meditation, any of that stuff is bad. It's all great. But the bedrock of most mental health is around meaning, purpose, relationships, connection and contribution. That's the basis of mental health, and the best place to get those things actually is at work in many cases, right? So we have to figure out a way to communicate, and this is what will also be as part of the community practices. How do you communicate to your funders, to your stakeholders, to your bosses that, hang on, the work I do has broader outcomes than just helping people choose a major or helping people get their next job or helping people figure out their next training program. It's much bigger than that. And that's kind of where we're headed. So if that interests you at all, send me an email and we'll put you on the list. And whenever you don't want to be on that list, we'll take you off the list. Okay? Did I miss anything?
Nope.
All right. Folks, that was a really crash course of a full-day thing, truly. And we will hang around during the coffee if you have questions. But we'll let you go now. Thank you very much for putting up with the speed talking. Take care.